welcome to the latest Moviescramble podcast. I am joined on this particular evening or morning, whenever you happen to listen to your podcast, by the dulcet tones of the one and only John. John, how are you?
I'm good, yeah. Dulcet is not a word I would normally hear about my own tones, but yes, it's very nice. Thank you very much. I'm good. Yeah, just I'm looking forward to having a bit of a break over Easter, which will be nice. And I've just been doing the usual stuff, working away and spending time in between watching lots of good and rubbish TV. So yeah, all good.
As long as the good and rubbish balance each other out, that makes it okay, doesn't it?
Sometimes the same programme.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you're listening into the podcast, hopefully your nights are getting lighter too, and this is the perfect accompaniment to a wine in the garden or some such thing. And on today's episode, we are going to be discussing the Oscar-winning American Fiction, which is written and directed by Cord Jefferson and is currently streaming on Amazon Prime. It is based on personal evidence novel Erasure, and it tells the story of Thelonious Monk Ellison, played by Jeffrey Wright, an academic and novelist who's disillusioned with literature. To prove his point that the book industry only wants to read stereotypical Black stories, he pens a novel under a pseudonym. Its unexpected success, in the form of awards and film deals, propels him into the centre of the madness that he so vociferously dislikes. So, John, this was your recommendation. So what were your first impressions watching the film?
To begin with, I actually didn't really want to watch the film. It's one of those ones that's been reviewed so positively by so many people that it almost puts you off in a way. Now, I've heard that from some other people as well, that if a film is given too much hype, then it's only really going to be a disappointment to them. So they tend to avoid the films. And I was like that for a wee while. But then I bit the bullet on it and gave it a watch last weekend. And I was thoroughly entertained by it right from the very opening sequence. I just thought, yep, I'm really going to enjoy this film. It was just the quality of the writing from the very start really shone through, and that kind of drags you right into it, and it just holds on to it for like the whole 2 hours. It was just absolutely superb. Really, really liked it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I thought it flew in because the writing was so sharp, and I think given this is a film about writing, it's really important that that was kind of spot on. But as I messaged John as I was watching it and said 5 minutes in and they've made a Nazi joke, so kind of felt like that was it. But yeah, I totally agree. I think from the offset, interestingly, I hadn't actually read any reviews. I had only sort of seen people on sort of Twitter or whatever, X, saying that they were going to see it. I obviously knew it won the Academy Award, but I didn't realise that it was treated so positively. But obviously, I can see why. I think the thing that stood out for me in particular, obviously, was Jeffrey Wright's performance. He's obviously not the sort of inspirational academic that we maybe got in Paul Giamatti and the Holdovers. He's actually quite disillusioned and quite angry. What did you think of his performance in general?
It was one that changed over the course of the film due to the fact that he was beginning as himself, and then he obviously had to take on this persona as Stagger Lee in order to promote the book and everything. So it was like a change in the way that he actually portrayed the character, because it was a different character, the way he portrayed the different characters on screen. To beginning, he was quite buttoned down, he was quite reserved, but he was very biting, but not in an over-the-top way. When he was talking to the student in the first scene, and they were talking, he had... I can't even remember what the name of the book was that they were discussing, but obviously had the N-word in it. And the student was very offended by it. And he says, well, I've come to terms with it. And she obviously hadn't. But he didn't go over the top. He was just very matter-of-fact about it. And as the film developed, you could see his frustrations, but they were kind of internalised. It was more exasperation as an outlet now and again, like when he was talking to the film producer, and the film producer was talking about the film that he was making, which was Plantation Annihilation, and he said, oh, good God. And he goes, yeah, I know, right? Because he obviously thought he was agreeing with him. But it was that sort of level of holding things down in a way that a lot of people didn't kind of get what he was trying to get across. And that went through his performance as Stagger Lee as well, the way that he put forward ideas and the way he was talking. They didn't get the ironic tone at any time, and that was masterfully done. I thought that was excellent, and just the way that his character was able to play off of other characters actually within the drama as well. Yeah, it was fantastic, and I'm not surprised that it was obviously nominated for an Oscar, because it was probably one of the performances here, right up there with Paul Giamatti, definitely right up there with Cillian Murphy. But yeah, unfortunately, he didn't get the nod. But the fact he was actually nominated was a big thing, I think. Definitely.
Yeah, especially because it is a sort of comedic performance. Like, I absolutely loved that scene in the restaurant where he's meeting with the producer, and he's obviously trying to be Stag Arlie, and he's like, I'll have was it a Chablis or something like that he orders? And the guy's like, oh, I didn't think you would order. And of course, you can see him sort of, drop straight away, and he's trying to obviously act very street, which is so hilarious because his idea of street clothes is like jeans and a t-shirt. And it's just so ridiculous. But I think the sense of humor is fantastic throughout. I think it's so dry. He's so sarcastic. And yet Plantation Annihilation might just be one of the funniest things I have ever. There were so many points in this film where I had to actually pause watching it because I was gutting myself laughing at whatever they'd said. And he really carries that throughout.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely, yeah. It's very, very well done. And part of that's the writing, but part of that's interpretation. Part of Jeffrey Wright as well. It definitely is. So it's a very good marriage of the two elements to that. So yes, but I mean, what do you really expect other than that from an actor like that? He's got such a back catalogue. He's done so many different things, and I don't think I've actually seen him in a bad role. So that's kind of says something anyway.
Yeah, I also loved how he was, obviously, the further he got into this, the more he was thinking, fuck, I need to get out of this. And we're in that conference call, and he's like, I'm actually going to change the name of the novel. And they're like, yeah. And he's like, I just want to call it Fuck. And you can see the two executives scrambling on the other end of the line, and then they're like, yeah, it's so edgy, it's so gutsy. And he's like, Jesus, I can't actually do anything to get these people to drop this book.
Yeah, and it's just that they say, give us a minute, we'll have a conference, and they come back and say, yeah, we'll do it. And they said, we could call it Fuck, but with PH in front of it. And then when they come back and he says, it's so edgy, and he goes, so it's so black. And the other guy at the end was saying, I'm so glad that you said that, because they obviously are thinking that way, but they're also thinking in terms of, well, we're going to sell a lot of copies of this book. And just the look on the faces of Monk and his publisher, his editor, just the look between them, because neither of them can believe that they've got away with this just because it's so outrageous. And yet they said, yeah, we can do that. It's going to be controversial, but controversy sells. Yeah,
well, I think that's the thing. Like the film, quite clearly takes huge swipes at how certain cultures or minorities are portrayed for a white audience or a mainstream audience or whatever you want to call it. There's obviously been a lot of controversy around this in cinema and within literature itself. How well do you think this film sort of sends that up, or do you think there's still?
It gets right to the heart of it, right from the very start, because he is railing against this right at the start because of the other author, who is obviously very well spoken. It's a conference or something. He's going to a book conference, and nobody's actually there to see him, so he goes to see this other writer, and she's very well spoken, and she's obviously the same sort of middle class upbringing that he's had, and then she starts doing a reading from her book, and it's all yo Shakondwa and all this sort of stuff, and it's just it goes completely different to the way she actually speaks and the tone of voice and everything, and you just see his horror the whole aspect of it, and this is something that is completely alien to him, and he's thinking it's completely alien to her as well, because she has a similar sort of background to him. And his background is he comes from a family where the father, who they never really said, I don't know if they said what he did, but he was considered to be some sort of a genius, and there was 3 doctors. The mother and his siblings were all doctors as well. So it's a very, very middle class, very clever family. So he doesn't know about street or anything, and it's just something that he can't engage with on sort of on the level as a writer or anything. It's not where he's coming from in terms of his books. Like he says, when he goes into the bookstore and he can't find his books in the fiction section, it's in the American Studies section, and he says the blackest thing about my books is the ink, because it's just books, but just because it's a black author, then he's put into that section. So that really gets to the heart of it, the fact that even though it's a fiction book and fiction books that he's been producing, they're still regarded as being African American books, black books, black authors, so it's African American studies. And it was the same with the film as well, when he was speaking to the guy who was buying the rights to the film, and all he could think about was, how am I going to sell this? How am I going to package this for an audience right across the States? So you're talking about right across the sort of middle America, because that's where the majority of the money's made. It's not made in the coast. It's something that appeals to all 4 quadrants. So they really got that, I think. It was quite interesting that this was based in a book, and yet they were quite happy for a film to be made about it, which had a go at the publishing industry and had a go at the movie industry at the same time. Now, and get away with it is quite something special, really.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think what I loved in particular was the scene where he starts writing my pathology, as it's called, and he starts writing down, and he's sitting at his desk, and he obviously, to help him, is imagining these 2 characters come to life, and every other word is like motherfucker and stuff like that. But what I loved is the characters kept turning around to him and saying, what do I say next? And he tries a line and it comes out and it's too posh. So he's like, I wouldn't say that. So it goes back again. So I think the joke is really, well nailed, as it were. I think everything is done very, very cleverly. And as you said, this film absolutely takes the piss out of anything that's labelled awards bait. So the fact that it was so heavily Oscar nominated it blows my mind.
Yeah, even though it's taking the mick out of the whole awards scene, both literally and movie, it's getting award nominations and award wins as well. It's crazy. I really liked that scene where he was doing the writing, because I always kind of wondered how people worked out what dialogue actually was between 2 people. Now, the way, like you say, the way he does it is you see him typing at the keyboard, and then the 2 characters are imagined, and they are actually carrying out the conversation and saying, what's my motivation here? This sort of stuff. What am I going to do here? Oh, it's an internal monologue that you do, and all this sort of stuff. And it was so well done. And it would have been nice if Simi was here, because he's obviously the author, the published author of the group. Now, how does he tackle dialogue? Is it thought through? Does he have a certain process for doing that, or is that something that is taught to writers, that you act out scenes of dialogue, because then by voicing it, it's a different dimension to how it actually looks on the page? Does it make it more authentic? Does it make it less authentic? Does it make it more staged? Because it's almost like a play then, isn't it? You've got 2 people actually talking it out, So it was an interesting way to put that across. And I think the director said, they wanted to try something different, rather than just sitting there typing away, looking up, having a drink of his whiskey, and then and then typing away again, and maybe the words on the screen or something like that, or him saying the words for both of them. So it was something a wee bit different. It's something I've not really seen before, the way that they do that. So it was really, really interesting and quite unique, I thought. It's nice
I can't think of another instance where I've seen that before. Just as a side note, Simi has said that during his writing process, he frequently has to scrub his browsing history, because it's like, do dead bodies float? Or would someone survive being stabbed in the neck and stuff like that? So his process is obviously a lot more gruesome. But I also thought as well, it just showed the disconnect between what Monk was trying to imagine and what he was trying to write and how he imagined it, because obviously he just didn't have the capacity to understand perhaps who these characters were and, you know, what they would sound like. And it obviously linked him to Issa Rae's character because, as you said, you know, she gave this really eloquent speech on her process and all that, and then went into a sort of stereotypical story about pregnancy tests. But what I thought was, so as well as obviously all this send up and all of this sort of, I mean, as I say, the way they sort of took the piss out of awards bait and all the rest of it was so good. But at the same time, there is actually like real drama going on. So obviously within Monk's family, and here's a slight, well, not a slight spoiler, a very big spoiler if you haven't seen this already, but you know, his sister dies within the first like 10 minutes or so. His brother has just come out as gay. He's left his wife and kids. He's obviously got some sort of substance abuse issues. His mum appears to have, you know, early onset dementia, and he kind of strikes up a romance with a woman across the street, which doesn't quite go to plan either. And there was a sort of lovely sort of dual, like double layer, because, you know, he insists that his books, you know, as you said, are not African-American stories. The only thing about them is ink, but this is an African-American story, and that all the characters are, and it's just sort of like a conventional drama in some senses as well. But I love the dynamics between him and all of his family, and the sort of unraveling of all of that against obviously the unraveling of his writing career as Stagg R. Leigh. What did you think of the sort of the family dynamic there and that sort of background to all of his work, I guess?
That was a bit of a surprise to me, because the trailers for the film tended to focus on the whole elements of him actually pretending to be somebody else and all that. So it didn't really introduce any of these elements during the trailers. I know you've only got like 2 minutes in the trailer, so you're not really going to, but it tended to stay away from that. And pretty much half of the film was this family drama, like you say. It gave another sort of dimension to his character. One of the reasons why he is the way he is, why he doesn't get on, he doesn't have a lot of time for people. He never really has. The way that he interacts with people, especially when he's in this Stagg R. Leigh persona, he's venting in a way, because it's the frustrations that he's had throughout his life. Now, in his own family circumstance, he was the favourite child out of all of them, and that created a bond between his siblings that he was sort of left out of, because he was always his father's favourite. And there was a whole story about his father being like basically a serial shagger more than anything else. He was just, you never see him or anything. You never see any photographs of him or anything like that. So, but this presence is always just in the background, and that presence has tended to rub off on Monk himself, the way that he treats people and the way that he gets along with people. Now, what happens as part of this drama is he realizes the sort of person that he has become through his conversations initially with his sister. He almost, like, just before she dies, he has like a couple of very touching moments with her, and he's really getting on well with her in a way that he obviously hasn't for a number of years. And then obviously that's cut off. And then he's obviously going through a similar sort of process with his brother. They have a more sort of spiky dynamic, but it makes for some really comedic moments. Like he was saying, like when he said, "Oh, you know what? My wife found me in bed with a man and all this sort of stuff, so therefore he's on his own." He says, "But now I've taken a lover." And all this, and the only thing that he is upset about is the fact that he used the phrase "taking a lover," because it's something that's very old. It's an old sort of phrase that you would use, you know, especially within sort of modern parlance, that the way that people talk about their relationships, they don't say those sort of things, but they do those sort of things, but don't say it. And it was nice to see the way that he actually became the person he was by his interactions with his mother and his brother and the housekeeper as well. I mean, yeah, that's how middle class can you get, that you have a housekeeper and, or, you know, they're part of the family. You think, no, they're an employee. They've always been an employee. They're not just part of the family, you know. So it was really good, and I thought it gave us more than I was expecting from the character of Monk. It made it more real, if you like you've said.
Yeah.
It's a real, people can relate to that kind of drama, that kind of story, whereas it'd be very difficult to relate to being a writer and pretending to be somebody else and promoting yourself as somebody else. So yeah, that whole side of it kind of grounded the film in a way that was a wee bit unexpected, but worked really well.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And I think it definitely was a show don't tell. So we didn't get a big monologue about how his childhood was or anything like that. It very much was, it was in the interactions, it was in those moments. I did love as well when his brother said, well, I've only been gay for a week, so I need to make up for lost time.
Yeah.
Which I thought was brilliant as well. And there's also the sort of cruel irony of the fact that, you know, Monk's mother is obviously very, very unwell and needs to go into some sort of assisted living facility. But in order to afford that, his previous forays into literature are just simply not going to pay the bills. So he is kind of torn between, he knows that Fuck, as it's now called, is going to bring in enormous amounts of money that will pay for his mum's healthcare, but he's kind of disgusted with himself at the thought of how excited he is about getting that paycheck.
Yes, that's the whole thing about basically the art. He's a published author and he's well regarded, but his stuff doesn't sell. So does he sell his soul in a way in order to help out his family, to help out his mother? Yeah, and that's almost constant all the way through. Even when he starts to make inroads and to start making money, he tries to sabotage it as much as possible, like what we talked about when they were changing the title of the film, and the way that he had the meeting with the producer. He tried to sabotage that, and then he obviously ran away from that meeting because he saw an ambulance outside, and he thought his mother was having an episode. And it actually turns out it wasn't. It was somebody else. It was somebody else within the same building. But the producer was that impressed that this fugitive from justice would run at the sound of any siren at all. So, yes, he was always questioning himself all the way through the film. He was questioning his motives. There was obviously a real need for him to make money, but was he doing it the right way? Basically, because he was selling himself. Even though he wasn't selling himself, he knew at some point he would have to come clean about it to somebody other than his editor. So somebody else would have to know about it. So yeah, but yeah, it was very, very interesting. What did you think?
I mean, the whole notion of, as I say, him really struggling with himself, I think, throughout also made his character more relatable because, as you quite rightly pointed out, not everybody can imagine what it's like to see your novel on the shelves of a bookstore or whatever. But I think this notion that he was struggling and somehow felt responsible because his sister, obviously before she passed away, seemed to really have her shit together. And she was really able to she was reminding him about, what about mum? What about this? And obviously her departure was so unexpected and it sort of left him in a place where he felt responsible because his brother obviously is going through his sort of identity crisis and therefore it all falls to him. But then he doesn't have that bond with his mother because his bond was with his dad because he was the favourite child. So I just thought it added this other sort of layer of relatability where, he did feel this burden of responsibility and he knew in some way that was kind of easy money, but it just wasn't sitting right with him because it taken back to that first scene where he's talking with his colleagues and he's like, yeah, I hope people, pick up your novel when they're walking through an airport. And to him, that's like the worst insult he could throw at a colleague. Like he was so proud of himself because he just thought that was terrible. But actually the irony turns out is that he's going to need those novels on the airports in order to actually support his family. So I did think it definitely added that sort of, we've all had a wee crisis of confidence at some point in our careers, and we've all obviously maybe had to look after a family member or worried about a family member. So I did think it added in this extra sort of layer of, he is quite an identifiable character. Yeah.
And it was interesting that he wasn't shown to have all the answers. He struggled as much as anybody else would under those circumstances because there are very few people who can come into a situation like that, especially being away from that dynamic for such a long time and command enough respect that they can get things done and make decisions. He was floundering at the same time. He didn't know what to do in terms of looking after things. There was a scene where he went back to the house and the house was in darkness because it was the sister that paid the electricity bill. So he'd obviously not thought about what were her responsibilities, what did she do, what do I have to do in order to fill that gap. He didn't know anything about that. The other brother didn't know anything about that either. So it was, a real learning experience. And it's something, like I said before, that you can relate to, because you can go into these situations and you don't know what to do. And sometimes in movies, they kind of gloss over that a wee bit. But here, no, they were like totally spot on, right on the money with that one.
Yeah, and it definitely brought a sort of layer of sadness, or sort of bittersweet, I guess, too, because in amongst all the chaos of, as you say, he's dodging ambulance sirens or he's appearing as a silhouette on television, there's also this element of everything's sort of unraveling, but like there's the kind of funny unraveling side of it where you're just like, how far is this joke going to go? But then there's also the very real and very tangible unraveling of his own family. So it sort of adds this kind of bittersweet element to it, which is definitely not, as you say, definitely not pitched in the trailer. Maybe they thought the humor would, I don't know, sell more. I certainly think the humor is the sort of shining aspect of it. I mean, there's so many one-liners, so many sort of physical setups as well. I loved the scene where, so as the sort of his success progresses, he's asked to sit on first of all, he's told he's a token diversity hire to sit on a judging panel for some sort of book award. And sure as fate, he's been asked to judge his own book. And he sort of predicts what his white counterparts are going to say. They're going to say it's worthy and essential and of the time, and then cut to the scene where they're all debating it. And of course, that's exactly what they say. And the humor for me is so sharp. Again, it's one of these films where I'm like, I'm kind of in a way surprised this has found an audience, as it were, because it's so clever at times. I know that sounds really snobby, but I think it's so well done.
Yeah, well, the whole introduction to that element of it, like you say, when he has the meeting with the guy that's organising the judging panel, and at first he doesn't want to do it, and he's saying, I'm not really interested in doing it, and you're saying, but there's a small amount of money for it, and he's saying, no, and he says, think about it this way: authors always judge other people's work. Now you've got the chance to do it professionally. He goes, I'm in. It just went right away. I'm in for that. So yeah, that was really good. Favorite part of the whole film for me was the wee sort of funeral service for the sister after she died, and he had to read out her self-written eulogy, and it was like, if you're reading this, I am dead. Hopefully, I died under the sweaty thrusts of Idris Elba, but it may have been slightly worse than that. I might have died under the sweaty thrusts of Russell Crowe.
Honestly, I have so much inspiration for my own eulogy now. I'm going to insist that it's very similar.
Oh, I was just killing myself at that. And then, of course, when he spreads the ashes in the water, somebody walks past and goes, "You can't do that, it's human remains."
Have you got a permit or something? He says.
Absolutely
it was classic.
And that kind of sort of set up the whole second half of the film, especially the interactions between the two brothers and everything as well. What did you think of Sterling K. Brown's performance as the brother?
I absolutely loved him in this as well. Like, he was so funny. Like, I love the jokes they were making. Was about they were insisting he was going to get played by, is it Tyler Perry? And he was just like, I am far too good looking for that. But again, there were so many layers to it. So there was the fact that he was clearly going through an identity crisis. I mean, he was cracking jokes about suddenly being gay and all the rest of it. But I'm sitting there thinking, going, God, you were married with 2 kids. Was that not torture for you for years? And he's obviously got, some abuse issues and all the rest of it. And it's just, but on the surface of it, he's cracking jokes. He's taking lovers. He's trying to put a face on it. And I think that, again, he's somebody who's obviously held down a really sort of high-flying career. He's a doctor as well. And yet there is that slight disconnect between him and Monk, and obviously him and his mother to a certain extent as well. And it's just a kind of fascinating character as well. There's so many elements to this film. You're like, I could have watched this for another 2 hours finding out what happened to everyone involved, because there's just so much to it. But I thought his performance was spot on. He was really, really funny when he needed to be, and some of the delivery of his lines, you were like, I can't imagine anyone else saying that in that way and doing it so perfectly. It was just, I thought he was brilliant.
Yeah, there was the bit where Monk was saying about how he'd seen his sister actually dead, and he said, you know, have you must have seen a dead body in your time being a doctor, and he says, I was a plastic surgeon. If there's a dead body on the table, something's seriously gone wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, it was just brilliant. And then later on, they were talking about something else. When I think it was when somebody had an accident or something, and he, like Monk was saying, you know, I'm a doctor, and he said, you're a doctor of literature. What are you going to do? Revive a sentence? So these wee one-liners are just, you know, totally spot on.
That was one of the moments when I had to pause the film, because I have never laughed so hard in my entire life. Revive a sentence was hysterical.
Cracking.
Oh,
just that was the power of the screenplay right there. The fact that you could have these wee moments, and it was so funny, but it didn't take you out of the drama, because you expected those characters to be able to say those sort of things and be able to get it across in a way that it both was humorous and biting at the same time.
Oh yeah, I mean, they were swapping
just reinforced the
barbs.
character.
Absolutely, but it gave, again, so all of the chat back and forth just gave you that dynamic to their sibling issues that obviously, you know, Sterling K. Brown's character maybe felt sort of slighted growing up, because although he became the doctor and successful, it probably wasn't enough for his father. So one thing I will say is that because this was so well written and so bloody funny, and although obviously it makes jokes about films getting made into books and spin-offs and all the rest of it, it does make me want to go and read the book.
Same, yeah. I actually want to see what the differences are. I would imagine there'll be quite a few, because obviously a book is always changed when you bring it to the screen in any form, whether it's long-form television programs or a 2-hour film. It must be even worse if it's a 2-hour film, because it's usually, it works out as, I think when they do a screenplay, it's a page a minute is the maximum that they have for a screenplay. So if you've got a book, it's 300 pages. You think about that, that's a third. You have to cut it. You have to take it down. You have to cut out 2/3 actually, really, to take it down to that sort of level. Now you can do a lot of that with, as you say, show don't tell, and you can sort of squash elements together if you like, and imply certain other things. But yeah, it's a Herculean task. It really is, and that's why it gets criticised, a lot of it, because they take away things from stories as well, and they change things. And they were doing that as part, when he was talking to the producer as well. Monk was being asked to come up with storylines on the fly.
Yeah, which I thought was an interesting little insight as well as to how things might actually work.
But you hear about that quite a lot in films, that they're taking such a long time to develop films, especially from books, and yet you usually have writers actually on like the soundstage or on location, and they're producing lines and changing lines as they're going along. It's almost like a daily thing. Some films start and they don't have a finished screenplay. They're just working at it and changing it as they go along. Now, obviously, that can be a complete recipe for disaster, because you're really working under tremendous pressure. But if you have somebody with the wit and the intelligence of Monk, who can come up with 2 or 3 ideas and say, well, we can do this, we can do that, and be in a position where if he's told no, that's not what we're looking for, he can say, well, fair enough, we'll move on to something else. He's not precious about the words that he's producing. He's been through the process so much now that he knows what sells. And he knows that, well, my soul's gone as far as that's concerned. You know, it's what I have to do. So
it did remind me of that scene in, is it Saving Mr. Banks, where they have P.L. Travers on the set of Mary Poppins, and she's like, this is fine as long as there's no made up words, and they have the Sherman Brothers sliding supercalifragilisticexpialidocious just off the piano, like, oh.
It's very like that. That's why a lot of films and TV stuff, they keep the original authors away from it, because they're making so many changes. They prefer if they're not involved in it. There was stuff about the Interview with the Vampire,
Oh yes,
When Anne Rice sold that to, I think it was Universal, I'm not 100% sure, she was still involved in it. She did the screenplay for it, and then she was very critical of a lot of the aspects of the film of it. And then when it came to do the second film, they just says, "No, you're all right. We don't need you to do the screenplay for this one," because she was such a presence and very precious of her work. And they can get too
she didn't agree
precious.
with the casting. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Was it Tom Cruise or was it Brad Pitt? Shouldn't like one or the other.
It was Tom Cruise. She took out a 2-page advert in one of the trade papers to say that she did not agree with the casting of Tom Cruise.
No.
But to her credit, after she saw the finished film, she saw a preview of it, she took out another advert saying, "I got it wrong. Tom Cruise is actually really, really good in this role." So she did go back on it, but a lot of the damage was done, obviously, the first time.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. I knew there was a disagreement. I didn't realise she'd taken out a 2-page advert.
Yeah.
Yep. So.
Yep. Well, how else do you get your word out there if you don't have the internet to do it, you know? So
that's
it kind of makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose that's testament to Cord Jefferson then for his adaptation of Percival Everett's novel, that it's obviously it's done a good job here.
Yeah. And a lot of the time the authors don't want to be associated with the production in case it is bad. And then they can say, "Oh, I had nothing to do with that." But if it turns out well, they can say, "Yeah, that's really good," because they know that a good adaptation will sell books as well as get bums and seats in the cinema. And there's always follow-ups. They can demand more money for the next book, all this sort of stuff. So, yeah, it's...
Or you get a nice re-release with the cover changed, as I noticed they've done with Poor Things recently.
Yes, well, they were talking about that with the book, My Pathology, because they had obviously sold the movie rights to it, so they were wanting to put Michael B. Jordan in a vest and was that a do-rag? A do-rag? It's just, oh man. And one of the when he was doing that was a callback to when he was imagining the scene between the two people and he was writing it. One of them was dressed exactly like that. They're wearing a black vest and they're wearing the headgear as well. So it was just a bit... That was what he was thinking of as a joke, but they were taking it very seriously, saying, we'll have him with the guns out and all this. So there's so much of that, just these wee moments and calling back and just calling out their not lack of understanding. They knew what they were doing, but they weren't. And they were just trying to push it as much as possible because it's all about sales. It's all about money. That's all they're interested in. The fact that he was trying to sell a book at the same time and no one would take it up at all. And yet when they got this one from this supposedly controversial author on the run, then it was hot, at that point. So and it was exactly the same person, and a lot of the language they used was exactly the same as well. So it's interesting, nice wee parallels all the way through the film, and not just in that, but obviously there was parallels in the sort of personal life story as well, all that kind of thing. The way that he get treated in a certain way by his father, and therefore he treated other people in the same way, and he didn't have like long-term relationships and things like that. And like he get called out for having a relationship with a white woman as well at one point, until he pointed out to his brother, "You married one." And said, "Oh, but she was a bitch. It doesn't really count." It's like, no, of course it counts.
It's honestly, it's one of these films where I feel like I'm definitely going to get repeat viewing enjoyment out of it, because there's so many wee lines where I was absolutely gutting myself, so I probably missed what was said next, or there's just these little, as you say, like little patterns and little nuances that you just think I could go back and watch this and I'll find 15 different things to from what I watched the first time. But it's so layer upon layer upon layer. One thing that kind of stood out to me as being sort of perhaps at odds maybe with the rest of the film was the ending. What did you think of that?
I think it was a very clever way of getting at Hollywood films, the way that a film can be completed and then it goes to test audiences and they don't like it, so therefore they have to change the ending, or what they have to make it more palatable for a mainstream audience. There, like obviously, he was talking about they went through the various scenarios for the ending, and the producer guy was saying, "No, can't do that. It's like a romantic comedy. Then that's not what we're going for. That's not the vibe here. No, we can't just cut to black because then we and it, eventually, and you could just see the spark in his eye. Then he went, I know what the end is going to be, and it was the kind of obvious ending, sort of downer ending, which I won't spoil or anything. But yeah, it was and then that wasn't the end, because there was a whole scene after that as well where it was the real end to it. So that was, I thought that was pretty clever. It was unexpected based on what had actually gone through the whole film previously, because it was a fairly straightforward story with two different elements playing out side by side, and then to have this that almost looks at the whole film as an artificial story in itself. It was a bit different, but I got it. I did go, aha, yep. It's just another thing that you're doing here. It's just having another wee go at the press and having a go at the movie industry. Did you feel differently towards it?
I think it kind of, I don't know, I think it caught me off guard. I think that was the thing. Like, it definitely, when the sort of ending sort of unfolded, I was like, okay. And then on reflection, I was like, okay, this is obviously another joke about sort of like edifice or playing to what the audience wants. But I think because up until that point, it had been a fairly straightforward, I mean, I don't know. It's one of these things where, again, I feel like if I go back and watch it again, I might feel differently about it. But I think because it kind of took me out of it for a little bit, although it's still part of the joke. Like, it's very obviously still part of the joke. But I think just because up until that point, we hadn't really seen anything like that. Not that I didn't appreciate it. Like I said, I thought it was, on reflection, I thought it was clever. But I think because it was just kind of out of nowhere, I was like, oh, okay. Or it was definitely unusual, but I think it plays into the whole sense of humor that the entire script has.
Yeah, I can see it sort of putting people off enjoying it because it's something a wee bit more out there. But I think that's what it was pushing for. It wasn't pushing for a sort of standard ending. It would have been perfectly fine if it had this linear ending, even sort of fade to black one. I kind of thought they might do that and just stop it there. But then when they didn't and did it, bravo, you're trying something else. You're pushing it a wee bit more. But yes, I can understand why it could annoy some people. I know it didn't annoy you or anything, but I can see why some people would be a wee bit annoyed and saying, well, it wasn't what I was expecting and all that. But again, that kind of plays against the expectations as well. So yeah.
Yeah, we can't get our novels and our films all tied up in a bow. That's not what we want.
No. No. And when you look at it that way, it's more realistic rather than a sort of pat ending that probably wouldn't happen. It would only happen in a film or a book. So it's something a little more realistic. It doesn't really end then, because he's, even at the end of the film, and this is giving nothing away about the ending of the film at all, he's not fixed. He's not completely changed man or anything. He's still a work in progress, like we all are. We don't have these moments where we, drive off into the sunset because, you do something else after that. You drive back.
Life doesn't stop.
Yeah, exactly. And if it did, you'd be kind of like, oh dear.
This is strange. Yeah. No, I think again, it's that whole sense of the sort of life is happening around him at some points, and he obviously feels maybe a lack of control over different elements of his life, and that sort of multiple option ending thing, I guess, is a kind of further sense of that. He isn't actually writing his own ending, as it were, because nobody gets to do that. That was a bit cheesy and on the nose. Apologies, listeners. Yeah, I mean, I think this is really going to do well on Amazon Prime. It's obviously done superbly well during awards season. Do you think that we'll see more kind of films like this hitting the awards circuit, ones that are very sort of nudge, nudge, wink, wink about awards season themselves?
I don't think so. I think this is a product of the novel and the approach by the director as well, because you've got to remember this is his debut feature.
Yeah, which is so impressive.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely, yes. I know these people don't just rock up from doing nothing. He's obviously had like a very long career up until this point, building up to the fact that he's actually directed a film like this. But you probably will see other films like this because Hollywood loves to try and do repeat business based on an idea. They're always trying to, but it'll be watered down. It won't be the same. It won't have the same impact because people will look back to American Fiction and say, well, that was a superior product. So some may try it, but I don't think anything will actually get to the same level as that anyway. I just don't see it somehow. Do you think that would happen?
No, I kind of, part of me almost thought that because it had been so successful, as you said, Hollywood loves, if this sells seats, then this is going to sell seats. And that is the danger, I guess, because we've obviously talked at great length on this pod, and everybody, out there in the sort of film discourse universe has talked about how, they're absolutely crying out for original, content. And albeit this is an adapted screenplay, it still feels very fresh, very original. Yeah. So I would fear it's a poor imitation. But I just think because it's so unusual, I feel like I've not really seen a film like this, that I kind of just want to cherish it on its own and let it be its own wee thing. I was wondering, do Amazon Prime release their viewing figures? It'd be interesting to know how this performs. I think I've recommended it to about 25 people in the past week alone. I'd be keen to see how it sort of does.
I don't know if they do. I've not really seen anything with regards to their figures. I know Netflix do a top 10 for the film, for everything, and they do a separate one for TV and film. And they actually release figures now about how many views they're getting, but only for the ones that are doing really well, not for the ones that are doing badly. Crucially enough.
If only we could all skew our figures that way, I know.
Yeah, so I don't know if Amazon do it. I haven't really seen anything, so I think they don't. Primarily because I don't think their streaming service is as big. I know they've been pushing it, so they've been bringing. They make their own films now, or they have input into a lot of films, so they get exclusive rights to them, and they go to cinemas and stuff as well. But I don't think they release any figures. But I think they will at some point. If things start doing really well, obviously they'll be wanting to promote stuff. They want to be promoting their service, so I think they'll probably start introducing it at some point. Because I don't think Disney do it either, or Apple. They don't seem to release figures. It's all part of a negotiation ploy as well, because if they don't actually release figures, then the people who are trying to do deals with them for big movies or big TV shows or whatever don't have that information to back up. This is your potential audience here, of 400 million views or whatever. So they like to keep these sort of things secret if they can. But I think that's going to be changing now that Netflix have started to do it. It seems to be Netflix do something and the others tend to follow to a certain extent. Because questions will be asked.
Well, that's the thing, but I think especially because this is just such a big film in terms of how well it's performed in the awards circuit, and of course Amazon are best placed to sell you the novel as an accompaniment. So because you watch this, you might like to buy this. So
yeah, Disney are trying to do that with certain things as well. On pages within their streaming platform, there is now, it used to just be, it would be, let's say, the episodes of a TV show, the extras, which could be like a wee behind the scenes thing or a trailer, and then the details, which basically just tells you like who's in it, and there's a wee synopsis and things like that. But now there's a fourth tab, which is shop on some of them. Ooh. And there's a QR code there to link you to, I think it must be the Disney store, so you can actually buy merchandise from the show or the film online, and it's done through Disney. Obviously, Amazon are a much better place because it's all within the one sort of ecosystem. It's not directing you anywhere else. It'd be quite easy for them just to have a wee link on screen saying, buy the book now.
Yeah, which is probably where this is all headed, because we've all sold our souls to at some extent by engaging with these streamers.
But you'd think they would do that for stuff that they've got a vested interest in rather than a rival publisher or anything like that. They would be wanting to use their own stuff if possible because they're maximising their profits then, really. They're not helping advertise somebody else's. Yeah, interesting times.
So, any other thoughts or insight you'd like to add on American Fiction?
Just about the soundtrack. This nice, soft jazz soundtrack, which wasn't Thelonious Monk at any time. He didn't feature in the soundtrack at all.
Which I thought was strange. I assume that's a rights issue or not a choice, or what do you think?
Possibly, yeah. Obviously, the character was called Thelonious, so I think they probably just stuck with that, and that's how he gets his nickname of Monk. But yeah, it was probably a rights thing, or it was going to be too expensive or whatever. Money can buy a lot of things, but whether they actually wanted to spend it, because I would imagine it would be a reasonably small budget on this film rather than you're not talking hundreds of millions, because there's not the same level of effects or anything like that. And I mean, I know everything now has effects because things that you take for granted are probably not there. They're just sort of painted in the background or whatever. So yeah, there probably isn't the money there to take that on. But yeah, the music was just great because it was all very soft and jazzy and very much in the background. But there was a couple of wee elements. The first time he became Stag, the music started to get just a wee bit funky and a wee bit more sort of street without going into any sort of rap or anything like that. But it was just
probably his version of street.
Just a wee grace note just in there, and it was just like, yep, that he's slightly changed in that way. And they did that a couple of times, and they didn't overdo it as well. It kept going back to the sort of the same sort of style of jazz, which was kind of quite light. It wasn't difficult. So yeah, I really did appreciate that. And I think it was it Laura Cartman, I think it was, who did the soundtrack. And she's done an awful lot over the last couple of months. She did the Marvels, for instance, so she's got like a fantastic range. So it was some really nice stuff in there as well. And the only other thing was there was a wee nod to, or I thought it might have been a wee nod to Saturday Night Fever in there, because when you see Stag going into the restaurant to meet with the producer, he initially goes in and he's just walking in, and then he realizes he's just walking like a normal person. He doesn't have a street walk, and he changes the way that he walks. So it's all, the shoulders are rolling and things like that. And it's very like John Travolta. I remember reading about John Travolta's approach to getting into a character, and the first thing he does is he works out what the walk is of the character.
So many actors say that the walk is the most important thing.
Yep, and obviously that was very important, Saturday Night Fever, because the very first scene is him walking down the street with the cans of paints, and he's got this almost musical feel the way that he's walking. He was very rhythmic. So, and I just thought that he was taking a very, like I say, an actorly way to get into a role of, I need a walk here, I have to change the way that I actually look. Yeah, the way that I move, I have to be more street that way, and he could tell because he didn't sit face on to him either. He sat slightly to the side, and he was going, so it was almost as if he was like shielding himself because he was very wary of the man, that kind of thing. So I thought that was very good, the way that he kind of introduced that character as a real character rather than just somebody on the phone. So yeah, those wee elements were really good. What about yourself? Anything?
Yeah, just so many good touches like that. As I say, my favourite thing in the whole film is he totally gives himself away by ordering like a very specific type of wine. And I just think that is one of the funniest things I've ever seen, but also just shows you again, like, how uncomfortable he is with this character. So although he thinks he's got the walk down and he thinks he's got the clothes right, he's still totally betraying who he is by doing that. But yeah, I honestly want to go, now that we've talked about it again, I'm like, I'm going to go watch this again. This was just so good.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's very easy to get back into that. It's not, you will find other things, I think. Yeah. I think I'll probably go and watch it again as well.
So it's a big recommend from me, and I'm assuming a big recommend from you as well, John.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think that's any secret at all. It was a fantastic film.
Top 10 of the year material, I think it's safe
Oh,
to say.
definitely,
I think I really enjoyed it.
So
if you have any thoughts on American Fiction, you can give us a shout at Moviescramble on all of your usual social platforms, X, Facebook, Instagram. And if on these lighter nights, if you are sitting out in the garden with a glass of wine and you're feeling a bit lonely and you want to give us an email, you can catch us at podcasts@moviescramble.co.uk. But until the next time, we will see you soon.
bye.
Bye.